Hi everybody, this is the Acid Left Public Capitalist Realism Reading Group. It's part of the Beyond Linguistics format where we read a book and we make artworks or memes in response to that book and discuss them. At the moment, as four of us, myself, Ernesto Vargas, Ray Adkins, and the YouTuber One Dime. So we've been discussing Capitalist Realism parts 1 and 2, or rather the first half of the book and the second half, chapters 1 to 5 and 6 to 9, which are on YouTube. And this is a public group where we're going to kind of follow that up and put it to a wider group and hopefully come up with some kind of angles we hadn't thought of ourselves. So we'll be doing, after this, we'll be going back to private readings of Ghosts of My Life and then The Weird and the Eerie, but then every 2 to 3 private readings will have another group reading. So we hope to kind of get some of you coming back there. And then after that, we're open to ideas on what we're going to read next. So once we've finished reading Fisher, and I think we'll also do his intro to acid communism, we will go on to something entirely different. So we're open to suggestions on what else we might read. So just to quickly introduce the Acid Left, we're a platform. We're on YouTube, Facebook, Insta, and now Twitch. And we basically discuss left issues, but with a strong leaning towards creativity, arts, psychology. So materialist, but we kind of lean towards stuff that's a little bit far out and which materialists often forget to mention. So really Frankfurt School kind of stuff, or deriving from that, a bit of Jungian psychology lately, and psychedelia. So there's kind of an interest in where that might take the left. In line with Mark Fisher's Acid Communism, the chapter to the book, the opening chapter to the book, he didn't complete, where he suggests that we might kind of return to an interest in, he doesn't really say psychedelia, but he kind of hints at mass creative movements like the beatnik hippie rave movements, which might open us up to new ways of thinking and ways of fostering a class awareness that aren't, purely oriented around economics. So that's very much our angle. So it's for that reason that we're visiting Fisher, because I think he is probably one of the theorists most relevant to materialism with a kind of creative and psychedelic angle. Psychedelic, is a bit trickier because he had his issues with smoking pot, with students getting high. We talked about in a video that's on our Acid Left channel, but I mean he touches upon this in Acid Communism, or at least it's suggestive of that. But certainly he hints in Capitalist Realism of a potential in creativity and a potential in actually in mental illness, which we'll talk about if it's directed in the right way. So thinking a little bit outside a normal kind of Marxist materialist direction. So I'm just going to start with a few comments myself and then play a section of the reading by eCodex. So eCodex is a YouTuber who very kindly read chapters 6 to 9 of Capitalist Realism. It's on her channel, and we're going to actually play some segments of her reading it as we talk around our memes. So just not to keep you too much before we get on to the memes and discussion. So Capitalist Realism came out in 2008. It was the flagship book of Zero Books, which had just began. It came out as the first batch of Zero Books books. And immediately became a success, propelling Fisher within a few years to the forefront of left theory circles in the UK, even despite not having a university post. And it's worth just remembering here that Fisher didn't actually teach in the university. He wasn't part of academia, officialized academia, although he had a PhD. When he talks about his teaching in college, in Capitalist Realism, there's a quirk of the US and UK education systems, or rather of them not being fully aligned, that when he says college, he means high school in the US system. which I think is worth bearing in mind. So when he's kind of getting upset at these students who just aren't into Nietzsche, he's actually getting upset at 16 to 18-year-olds and not 18 to 21-year-olds and higher. But anyhow, he went very far. He actually then did get into a kind of adjunct teaching position in Goldsmiths, and then became a full-time or permanent faculty member, I believe. Since its publication, capitalist realism has never waned in importance, and has actually arguably become much more important since this kind of recent turn that Fisher kind of predicted. This slide towards a kind of extreme right-wing politics within mainstream politics. So what you can see with Brexit, Trump, and Boris Johnson in the UK, and then other regimes in Central and Eastern Europe and South America. So basically, Fisher said the book, the whole kind of premise is that there is no alternative, or rather, is there an alternative to capitalism? And he kind of says there isn't, that capitalism always kind of co-opts its alternatives. And I think this slide to the right kind of proves that where we very much would expect a left alternative to have come out of the economic collapse of 2007, 2008, we actually ended up with a right alternative, a kind of working class or populist right movement, right-wing movement. So, with Sanders and Corbyn both being squarely defeated by actually their own parties, arguably, we can really see how much the political system is weighted against defeating capitalism. So I think that's kind of very important. The other observation I want to make, and why the book's very important, is because we have this kind of massive move towards communication technologies such as social media, smartphones, etc., which were coming in when Fisher was writing. But actually, if you think Capitalist Realism came out in 2008, Facebook uptake wasn't really big till around 2007, 2008, 9. A number of platforms we use now just weren't used back then. So whilst Fisher was a blogger and very much into the potential of the internet, he didn't actually, he wasn't working, or certainly in capitalist realism, he wasn't writing with our current kind of data economy in mind. But he did kind of talk about this process of capitalism co-opting things like rap music, Nirvana's music, or basically saying that no kind of real rebellion could take place. And Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, was kind of a response to the impossibility of actually really being a kind of punk or a real radical. And actually, that's also arguable with the Sex Pistols, who were kind of manufactured back in the 70s. But what I see with social media is kind of an expansion of that. So that where you're getting now Mark Fisher memes, and there are Mark Fisher Facebook pages, Instagram pages, and just a tendency to make Mark Fisher memes and apply Mark Fisher hashtags in Instagram, you're kind of seeing this taken to an even more extreme degree than Fisher lived with, because his book is the kind of primary mainstream or semi-mainstream text against capitalism and pointing out the impossibility of making an anti-capitalist statement. And he's actually been turned into these quite crude memes, things like there's a Mark Fisher bedspread meme, or various. I think people actually have ordered Mark Fisher bedspread, so where you can have, like, what do you call this, duvet cover. You can choose a photo to be printed on it, and people have these memes of their Mark Fisher Capitalist Realism bedspreads with exactly with that cover there. There's that, and there's Mark Fisher doormats, but there's also just some fairly ridiculous statements about Fisher that are going around, and quite bad taste sometimes. They've often actually missed the point of Fisher entirely. But this is kind of the thing with social media, where you think, well, it's great that anyone can now comment on anything. Then you get that kind of moment where you have to kind of deal with the fact that sometimes you get people just saying some really dumb shit. The memeing of Mark Fisher, I call it, basically reduces his image to a meme unit precisely within the economy of the data exchange. And it's perhaps the ultimate irony and fulfillment of Fisher's theory, stating that there really is no alternative. So I think this kind of adds to a sense of helplessness, which reiterates what the whole book is about, and that is that capitalism actually leads to mental illness, and particularly depression. And I think you get this, people feeling estranged, going to the internet to express their estrangement, which is actually a kind of Marxist alienation, expressing it through memes, but then seeing the memes kind of be co-opted or just be actually quite useless. So it's a kind of redoubling of the frustration. And then I think one is actually inclined just to make stupid memes, knowing that they're not going to do much anyway. So I think some young people are almost ahead of the game. So they go into meme production at 18, leftist meme production, maybe even younger, just making nonsense statements, which is kind of where they'd end up if they did it for 10 years. Because, doing it for years and trying to do it properly, you do end up disillusioned of just like churning out stupid statements for the sake of it. So there's this kind of loop whereby capitalism angers and alienates subjects who then respond with rebellious material that is co-opted, which then makes them kind of angrier. And it's kind of difficult to see any way out, even more than when Fisher said there was no way out. So I think that's why his book's becoming ever more relevant. So it all seems kind of pretty bleak. So in light of that bleakness, I actually want to start with the end of his book, which seems odd, but in the sense, the end of books is normally where you find out what they're about. So I'm actually going to play the very end first and just reflect on where there is some positivity in that ending. So I'm going to go to eCodex.
We must convert widespread mental health problems from medicalized conditions into affective antagonisms. Affective disorders are forms of a captured discontent. This disaffectation can and must be channeled outwards, directed towards its real cause, capital. Furthermore, the proliferation of certain kinds of mental illness in late capitalism makes the case for a new austerity, a case that is also made by the increasing urgency of dealing with environmental disaster. Nothing contradicts capitalism's constitutive imperative towards growth more than the concept of rationing goods and sources. Yet it is becoming uncomfortably clear that consumer self-regulation and the market will not be by themselves avert environmental catastrophe. There's a libidinal as well as a practical case to be made for this new ascesis. If, as Oliver James, Zizek, and Supernanny have shown, unlimited license leads to misery and disaffectation, then limitations placed on desire are likely to quicken rather than deaden it. In any case, rationing of some sort is inevitable. I'm so sorry. This has just been a rough day. The issue is whether it will be collectively managed or whether it will be imposed by authoritarian means when it is already too late. Quite what forms this collective management should take. Wow, this is just a really weirdly edited passage. What forms this collective management should take is, again, an open question, one that can only be resolved practically and experimentally. The long, dark night at the end of history has to be grasped as an enormous opportunity. The very oppressive pervasiveness of capitalist realism means that even glimmers of alternative political and economic possibilities can have a disproportionately great effect. The tiniest event can tear a hole in the gray curtain of reaction which has marked the horizons of possibility under capitalist realism. From a situation in which nothing can happen, suddenly anything is possible again.
Okay, was the volume okay on that? Could have been a bit higher, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, eCodex, they're questioning Zero Book's editing capacity. But I think there are some kind of passages there which maybe are a little bit difficult to get your tongue around when you're reading. But thank you, eCodex. It's been really great to have her reading the chapters, and she'll be reading from Ghosts of My Life as well. So I like this beginning of that passage. So Fisher says we must convert widespread mental health problems from medicalized conditions into effective antagonisms. So it's just kind of saying that we can kind of seize on the alienation and the disaffection caused by capitalism and turn it around creatively. So there's this kind of glimmer of hope in a book that is otherwise quite hopeless. And I think, this really could be the intro to acid communism, or rather acid communism appears to be a follow-up directly to the end of this book, is what it feels like to me. Where in acid communism, Fisher kind of is hinting at maybe mass movements made by disaffected people, and those movements being, something akin to the hippie movement or the rave movement. So not like the Sanders movement or the Corbyn movement so much, which were great
quite
movements.
Libertarian.
Yeah, I think the Sanders and Corbyn movements were great, but the Sanders and Corbyn movements just felt a little bit almost like there was some kind of a bit churchy, or there was kind of a kind of celebratory, let's get together feel, but it was missing something really incisive that maybe you would have if you added some music and some drugs or something. I don't know.
The psychic appeal.
Yeah, some kind of something like that. But okay, so I just wanted to kind of start with the end there, and we'll probably come back to the end later. But that is kind of pretty much what I'm going to say for now. The next bit I have coming up is Adam's meme. So we'll show the meme, and then we'll show. How should we do this? I think actually we're going to play eCodex reading that.
Yeah, it's a short quote.
Yeah.
We must
Let's see if we can find you. Yeah.
Rather, the most powerful forms of desire are precisely cravings for the strange, the unexpected, the weird. These can only be supplied by artists and media professionals who are prepared to give people something different from what already satisfies them. By those, that is to say, prepared to take on a certain kind of risk.
Okay, so that was that, and we'll find your meme. So the meme says pretty much the same, yeah.
Yeah, and so the reason I chose this passage, which I thought was great, is because it does both hint at the transition into the thoughts that lead to acid communism, and it also kind of goes directly with the themes more explored in Ghost of My Life. So what I showed here is, it's a very glitchy image I made. At the bottom down there is a picture of Abigail Shapiro, who is Ben Shapiro's sister, and she runs a prominent Return to Tradition for Women YouTube channel. And it's all about how you should actually live the traditional patriarchal vision of womanhood. It's a very conservative view. But as she was not getting many views, and people were really making fun of her, she put out this video that is her in these like very nerdy glasses and bright red lipstick, saying that she might be a little nerdy and pointing to a D&D die down there. It's like a D12, I believe. And it's obviously some kind of like aesthetic reference to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and then, trying to take on that idea of AOC got really popular recently, or it was a very popular event from her playing Among Us on Twitch and other games and stuff like that. So trying to like ape off of this thing, but totally missing the point. And then the one at the top is a screenshot from Belle Delphine's Christmas sex tape. So really kind of like throwing these together as this craving for the strange and unexpected that we want artists to deliver. But what Fisher's point here in that passage is really about how today, when the public has become consumers of content, rather, more individualistic, you can't produce the strange in such an easy way. It's harder for there to be artists and media personalities who are willing to do this stuff. So in this argument for the Marxist super nanny, it also includes something that would be like a state-sponsored avant-garde of some sort, something where there's freedom allowed by people to create that doesn't rely so strongly on market forces that you can actually get into something new, something experimental, something dangerous, which he argues is actually more prominent in the the stodgy 70s media landscape of the UK than you see now today, when we have supposedly so many more choices, yet they're all dictated and controlled by market outcomes.
What's funny is I actually almost took that same quote as the one I was going to pick, because it's just, and I was going to, instead of I was going to put Simpsons wave, but I chose a different quote, obviously, but it was one that popped out. And I believe he touches on ideas relating to this in Weird and the Eerie, but it is there is a craving clearly for something, out of the ordinary, but that doesn't always have the potential we might expect it to have. Obviously, as you're showing us, sometimes this craving can just be completely absurd. And it's not I don't really look at it necessarily as meaning that the internet is precisely negative for art. It's just that we have so much content, so much flooding, that we see the stuff that you would normally never even see pre-internet. It might have been repressed or something. You would never have access to so much, crazy content like this. But the craving for weird things is clearly there, and you can see that. I would say what people often refer to as the golden age of YouTube was sort of, I guess you could say, early 2010s, 2008 to early 2010s, when you would have the most random things become very popular. And you might think, oh, this new free media sphere is gonna, allow for abstract art and all of these new innovations. But then you get, I don't know, Smosh. Or
no, that's true. Yeah, you're right. That's
can
that's
you just
definitely
can
there.
you clarify what Smush is? Because I haven't heard of it. Maybe it's Canadian.
Well, I mean, they're not the worst examples, but they're just some of the biggest YouTubers that just have kind of really absurd comedy. But I would say a better example, if people have heard of him, is Filthy Frank, who is very popular, just for having the most absurd anti-PC type content. I wouldn't say it's reactionary, but it was anti-PC. It was very just edgy boy, really in total insanity. And he's now a full-blown artist called Joji. But that is what his appeal to me screams of this quote is the appealing for the strange. And that appealing for the strange isn't always something political or art. It's obviously a big yearning, and whatever floods the market will, can potentially, I guess, satisfy that. For better, for worse.
Right. In Mexico, we had our state-sponsored artistic vanguard, so to speak. It was a bit of a controversial thing, but we had this whole muralista movement, Frida and Diego and all of their partners, Siqueiros, etc., and they produced very, very edifying art, right? You can still see it. It still gets replicated around the world. People still try to, create this, because it's kind of this mix of, traditional art, popular art, because it's supposed to be viewed as a crowd, right? It's not supposed to be, for example, a meme, right? You can watch it in privacy, right? On your phone, scrolling. but this is, this is big, but not big for one, but big for all, right? I thought that kind of effect that movement had. I think if different movements like those show up around the world, I think that would be great.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to call for. Obviously, it's not the answer, but it's helpful in bringing the public imagination into something greater. But it has to be combined with other movements on the street, connecting all sorts of things.
Well,
Right.
I have a rebuttal to that probably someone listening might think is
Right.
how easily could that result in like a Soviet realism? Because
I mean,
it depends.
if you look at muralismo, it is a Mexican Soviet realism pretty much, and it was produced by a very small section of the population of bourgeoisie, right? So I do agree with that. It will, make some people rise to the top of the capitalist hierarchy and nothing else. That is a fair criticism. I agree.
Yeah, that's possible for sure. Because even with Soviet realism, you have to think the art at the beginning of the Bolshevik Revolution was, very avant-garde. The constructivists and the people around them, they were aiming for something very different. And socialist realism came in and specifically squashed that and made it illegal. And so I don't know, maybe that movement in Mexico sits somewhere between there, because I don't know, Frida Kahlo to me is one of the best surrealists of all time. Her work is brilliant. And I like Diego Rivera as well, but her work is... Anyways, let's go on.
Yeah, I'll just come in there. I think what that, where that goes, the idea that we need artists, media people to kind of get involved and allow the public imagination to flourish. It depends on to what extent that is state controlled. And I think capitalist realism, it seems to suggest we need to return to a kind of an embrace of state control, or not consider it something just for capitalists. And I think Fisher is kind of down on anarchism. That's to say, he doesn't like very much anarchists. In his essay, what's the full name of the Vampire Castle essay? Exiting the Vampire Castle.
Yeah.
Aside from what we would call identitarian politics, he kind of targeted anarchists, as he saw as particularly unhelpful in forging a kind of mass movement.
And Occupy especially. I think he was responding to later on in Occupy.
I think a very particular experience of anarchists in Britain who tend to be very much around kind of partying and not doing very much else, and don't like to kind of reach out to the community, but kind of more keep things in their own kind of clique, which is basically just anti-everything. I don't think that, that's not reflected everywhere. I think there are some very kind of useful and together anarchist movements. I think there are some in Southern Europe, Greece and Italy, but the British experience, I can say, is very much like that. And that may be partly what influenced his statism, the fact that he's kind of seems to be for a strong state, left state. But yeah, it's interesting. What would a kind of state-run wacky art scheme be? I can't really imagine it existing. I always worry when the state get involved in art beyond just running museums.
Well, here in Mexico, we still have an ongoing promotion of this kind of community art, and what typically happens is that they gather collectives from neighborhoods and they paint murals, right, on walls, and generally it's just creating landmarks, right, for the city.
And I think there are state schemes certainly in Britain that very much around community art, but nothing that really challenges I mean, it always seems somehow it loses its teeth once it's kind of incorporated within the Arts Council of England budget.
Right? Yeah, it's not transgressive or anything at all. It's just it's bourgeois populism, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, to have something really far out, you do need. I think you need to be kind of free of the state, as we experience the state now, and that's what you get on the internet. You get like people just producing stuff that's nothing to do with the state, nothing to do with a university course or college course, and it can be pretty far out, but then it tends to be just like edgelordy, rejection of everything, which is unfortunate. How to kind of bring that into a kind of cohesive.
It depends
message,
where you're looking, though.
Know.
Yeah, I do also. Oh, go ahead, one time.
Oh well, I'll just be really quick. I think it depends where you're looking, because if you look like there, I don't think there was really a point in history where you can find a majority of. First of all, nowhere in history did the majority of the population have even the capabilities to produce art, and then there was a possibility, obviously. With the advent of TV and technology, but I don't think it's necessarily a big surprise that more content is, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word, like just superfluous. I think, to be honest, it's better than just having a hegemony, which is what you had I guess you could say, when it was just cable TV controlling everything and everything was just game shows. I mean, was that any better? I would say certainly not. I mean, at least there's a somewhat diversity of trash as opposed to like a hegemony,
Yeah, it's definitely better now. There's no doubt. And where you were saying earlier that there's all this potential. People can do anything, but then you get these kind of trashy YouTube channels, and you get like cat memes or like. We can think about our YouTube stats as left YouTube producers, but you get cats playing piano that get 20 million hits. But that's what you get when anything goes. Anyone can make anything. You do get a lot of trash, but
isn't that just a market, though?
All right. So yeah,
people like that stuff. But I mean, compared to the 80s, I think we are much better off in that anyone can make anything. Then you get like, well, anyone can make anything. Can you then turn around and say, yeah, but you shouldn't be making that. You shouldn't be messing around with that, cat memes or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's a very tricky ground. But I suppose that is the question: is like, how much should we be trying to direct this kind of very open creativity? Do we need a vanguard? Really, I suppose we need like a Marxist-Leninist vanguard of art, which is kind of what you had, as Adam was saying, in the early communist Russia. You had, or Soviet states, you had these really far out street processions, street art. You had these trains, like these Kino trains, cinema trains that used to run into like deepest Russia and show people avant-garde cinema. These really interesting schemes, but then I guess they were just too good at making people think freely. That's when you got Soviet realism instead, socialist realism.
I don't think. Well, I could see people making the argument for Vanguard, but that's definitely not Fisher's. Even though he's certainly not I guess you could say he's for like I guess like a nanny state to an extent. But what I got, at least from K-Punk as the Acid Communism essay, is really that he's sort of like advocating for a Salvador Allende type democratic socialism. So like. I guess in that, by that logic, yeah, a planned economy to an extent, but a democratically planned economy, as opposed to a vanguard, which is obviously more centralized.
Yeah, but I think it's a very short book, and there's only so much one can expect it to do. Capitalist realism. I'm not really sure on I mean, it certainly doesn't suggest a vanguard. No, I'm not saying that he suggests that. I'm saying maybe that's what's pointed to. As what maybe that's what we need, but how much he's like arguing for a big state, I don't know. He seems to even contradict himself at points, but certainly there is a strong argument towards socialism and away from anarchism, again, as I stated. But so we don't go around in circles here, and kind of also lose our group here. that are along with us. Let's move to the next meme and segment. So I'm going to play, it will be one dime, it will be what you are going to discuss next. Where did I put that?
We must
Okay, so one dime. This is going to be quite a lot of text, kind of prior to the literal part that you quote, and then it'll actually be the quote that's going to be in the meme we show in a second. So I'm starting now.
Despite initial appearances and hopes, capitalist realism is not undermined by the credit crisis of 2008. The speculations that capitalism might be on the verge of collapsing soon proved to be unfounded. It quickly became clear that, far from constituting the end of capitalism, the bank bailouts were a massive reassertion of the capitalist realist insistence that there is no alternative. Allowing the banking system to disintegrate was held to be unthinkable, and what ensued was a vast hemorrhaging of public money into private hands. Nevertheless, what did happen in 2008 was the collapse of the framework which has provided ideological cover for capitalist accumulation since the 1970s. After the bank bailouts, neoliberalism has, in every sense, been discredited. That is not to say that neoliberalism has disappeared overnight. On the contrary, its assumptions continue to dominate political economy, but that they do so now as no longer part of an ideological project that has a confident forward momentum, but is inertial, undead defaults. We can now see that while neoliberalism was necessarily capitalist realist, capitalist realism could not be neoliberal. In order to save itself, capitalism could revert to a model of social democracy or to a children of men-like authoritarianism. Without a credible and coherent alternative to capitalism, capitalist realism will continue to rule the political, economic unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so your meme.
Yeah, it's right there. There's the moving one if you want to. Either works. But yeah, I chose that quote particularly because when applying capitalist realism, it's easy to think that you'll immediately think that this is applicable to all the neoliberal ideologues out there, or just the widespread cynicism that there isn't an alternative to capitalism. But what I think is an overlooked application of capitalist realism is to the left, particularly social democracy, social democrats. I actually think social democracy as an ideology is a form of capitalist realism today. Because capitalist realism as a ideology and the way it's implemented are two very different things, and there's a big disconnect. So in response to the failures of capitalism, particularly manifested in the 2008 crisis, housing crisis, speculation crisis, you saw more than while you did see people, look back at Marxist texts, overwhelmingly what you more just saw is a sort of revitalization of Keynesian economics. So it wasn't so much, okay, maybe we should just question how capitalism as a system has this tendency, the Marxian crisis theory of booms and busts, or the fact that this is perhaps an inevitable product of capitalism. But Keynesianism, which is the guiding economics behind most social democracy, and I'll be clear here, when I say social democracy, I am not speaking of Sanders and Corbyn, even because they are a robust form of social democracy with the goal of going to democratic socialism, essentially a worker-controlled economy. Whereas social democracy in its implementation that's not its goal most of the time. And what I see is more so like the conventional social democrats who you see becoming very popular recently over the last few years is people like Elizabeth Warren, and I put the economist there, Robert Reich, who became very popular, I believe, around 2012 to 2016, kind of when people were disappointed about like the neoliberal Obama regime, and it's sort of calling for a welfare state, more regulation. And the reason why I have a big problem with this is because it doesn't really address the core contradictions of capitalism that get it to this in the first place. And it's more just a reversion to the welfare state. And although people, social democrats like Warren, do advocate for a welfare state stronger than that of Theodore Franklin Roosevelt, but it is somewhere along the lines of a Clement Attlee type social democracy. And I think this is a capitalist realism because people, well, how did we go from robust, or not really robust, but light social democracy to neoliberalism? Well, there was an inevitable process of capital that led to that. Slower economic growth. The capitalist class wanted a way to go back to the 1920s style laissez-faire economy. They're getting fed up with the concessions and having to deal with unions, as well as the fact that many industries were still nationalized. There is a propensity of capitalism to always strive for economic growth upwards, and it needs to by design. That's part of the function of the stock exchange. So to revert to a kind of social democracy is not, I see this as failing to understand the problem, but it is derived from a sort of capitalist realism. Because if you look at the economists like Robert Reich, or I think another one who's very popular is Thomas Piketty, the French economist, author of Capital in the 21st Century. He has a documentary on Netflix too right now. And the way he sort of paints the picture is socialism bad. Socialism failed, or he says, they say communism because they don't make a difference usually, but they say communism failed, it doesn't work. But capitalism, there's something, you know, it needs the state, and this trickle down economics, supply side economics, which I would argue is not actually new. It was the 1920s style capitalism too. This isn't working, so we need to go back to a sort of nanny state to kind of deal with a lot of the inequalities we're facing, also climate collapse, because it's clear the market can't really solve all those problems. But it fails to, you know, address how we even got to this stage in the first place. And there's no guarantee that another social democracy will just also, even if it was re-implemented, that it wouldn't be torn apart again by a preceding authoritarian government. See,
I think it necessarily would.
Yeah, it would. Exactly. That's the point. It's like you see, people like to point to Scandinavia. I remember that was a thing. I remember when people thought Scandinavian countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland's not Scandinavia, but Nordic countries. They would point to these countries as socialism, which they're obviously not socialists. And obviously they have a lot more services that are a lot better, or which have been taken away in countries like the UK, Canada, and the United States. But what they fail to see is that actually the welfare state in most of these countries, with the exception of Iceland, I believe, the welfare state's actually been gradually eroded over time. And that is the tendency of capital. So for capital to save itself in a material sense, it doesn't necessarily need to just reassert neoliberalism. So it doesn't have to just reappear in more neoliberalism or say that everything is fine, like how Steven Pinker and the Bill Gates do. But they could just as easily reemerge as a social democracy. Historically, it's been an easy way to absolutely quash socialist movements because it gives people a slice of the pie, a little bit of concessions, while, you know, sort of, to an extent, pacifying. But I don't think it's fair to say pacifying, but it is a way to compromise with labor movements.
Yeah,
and
so
that's another. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty much what. Sorry for interrupting you, Adam. I'll be very quick, but I mean, it is very much what we're seeing now. Is literally that you have the IMF proposing their whatever this scheme is called, the Great Reset.
Yeah,
which is kind of a social democracy movement, because you can't really rely on these populist right governments to do that. And I think the IMF think that's what we probably need to stop the world just kind of imploding. or stop it imploding so quickly as it will anyway. So I think that's where we're going. I will say something about Finland, is where I live, and I've lived in the UK and Italy before. The wealth provisions are dwindling. Apparently, I've only been here 2 years. They've been dwindling, or they've been kind of like cut back since the 80s or so. Actually, there's a joke that I think it's a Russian joke that Russian president, I guess the joke would have been at the time, Gorbachev, came to Finland and he went back and he's like, damn, they're doing communism better than we are, because it had this just incredible welfare system. It still has a pretty good one, really much better than Italy or UK. If America and UK could get this, standard of living would just increase incredibly. So I don't blame Sanders and Corbyn for going after a Nordic model. It would be a significant improvement, but it's still a capitalist
They go a lot
country.
further, though, wouldn't you say?
The Corbyn would go further than he.
I would say the most radical part of Corbyn and Bernie Sanders' plans was the fact that major corporations listed on the stock exchange would have to allocate, I think it was like 30 or 40% of all profits into a mutual fund that is owned de facto by workers. So that means they're guaranteed to that.
I don't know how. I don't think Bernie could get even close to the Nordic model in the first term in America, honestly. I don't know what his end game is, but I mean, the end game is there's people in Parliament, in the cabinet in Finland, whose end game goes obviously way beyond what already exists in Finland. I suppose my point is that it's much better here than the UK, US, or Italy, but it's still capitalist, as you were saying earlier. I mean, it is capitalism, and the wealth, you have to ask where you can trace the wealth to. It must be, a lot of the wealth in Finland must derive from Finland being a Northern European country tied in to mechanisms of trade with ex-imperial states. You see what I mean? There's no wealth in the West that isn't somehow based on exploitation of the global South.
Yeah, well, France is the perfect example. France and social democracy. But I'm glad you brought out the Great Reset, because that's actually very important, because that's actually my key prediction for where capital will go. Because there's two possibilities here, which I think Mark Fisher was really good at predicting, is that we could end up in a sort of authoritarianism or a social democracy in a way for capital to reassert itself. And I think it's a mixture of both. Because one could say Trump is that authoritarianism, but I would say the neoliberal state has always been authoritarian in some form, like with Obama quashing Occupy Wall Street. To an extent, the state in a capitalist society is always authoritarian when it needs to save itself. But to really prevent the system from imploding, and also deal with future crisis, which the current model has shown completely unable to do. And don't be mistaken, like capital is not necessarily cheering on the coronavirus. Some people, I've seen some people, I don't think you guys, I don't believe that, but there's people, a lot of leftists on Twitter who kind of have this conspiracy that the government is not caring about COVID because it's an excuse to transfer wealth. And to that, I would just say they've been doing that for the last 30 years. They don't need that. Actually, capital has largely suffered from the coronavirus, and that's why they've printed trillions of dollars to kind of inflate the assets. So to prevent this from happening, I think capital will go to a social democracy, sort of. With Great Reset, they're flirting with ideas like Keynesian, neo-Keynesian ideas, such as a basic income. I could see that happening. I don't think we will see nationalization of a lot of assets, because you would have a capital backlash against that. But I think we might see an Andrew Yang style social democracy. And what I mean by that is robust spending, a lot of money printing, handing it to people to consume, to buy goods, which will, and as well as maybe potentially lowering taxes, so to make starting businesses easier. So like, this is like not neoliberal because it's not austerity, but it's a way for capital to reassert itself. So for the left should not be, I don't think the left should be proposing a Green New Deal as like only their entire platform, because I think there will be a point in time where maybe not everything in the Green New Deal, but a large part of it will actually be largely embraced by the capitalist status quo. It's not threatening. And to even get there, you have to bargain for something more. There actually has to be something to bargain with. So what I mean is, I think having social democracy as the left's platform is not really going to get anywhere.
Yeah,
and there has to be.
I want to just come in there. Sorry. Good points. I'm just thinking. I think this increase in social democracy or return to some kind of form of social democracy is inevitable, and it's almost bizarre that we kind of need the IMF to push that, because we couldn't rely on Johnson to push it, and we couldn't have relied on Trump to push it in a second term. I don't think that Biden would go down that far down that route without being pushed. So bizarrely, we've got the IMF actually, in a sense, coming to our rescue, but not doing anything like what we really want to happen at all, but at least bringing us back from the brink with kind of like right-wing populist austerity. But I just want to come in there because we have a number of guests, we have to keep things moving, but maybe we can get back to your points in a bit, if that's okay. And I'm going to play Ernesto has 3 memes. I'm going to play his first quote here.
It would be a mistake to regard this market Stalinism as some deviation from the true spirit of capitalism. On the contrary, it would be better to say that an essential dimension of Stalinism was inhibited by its association with a social project like socialism, and can only emerge in a late capitalist culture in which images require an autonomous force. The way value is generated on the stock exchange depends on, of course, less than on what a company really does and more the perceptions of it, and the beliefs about its future performance. In capitalism, that is to say, all that is solid melts into PR, and late capitalism is defined at least as much by this ubiquitous tendency towards PR production as it is by the imposition of market mechanisms.
Right. So
yeah, okay.
Should I comment on it?
All the solid melts into PR.
Oh yeah, the meme.
Here's your meme. Hang on.
Right.
But yeah, you feel free to start. Here we go.
Right. So the meme has one of my favorite rebrands of the year so far on the background. I don't know if you guys saw it in the news or Twitter, or I don't know what you guys watch. The CIA rebrand. Did you guys catch that?
No.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, right.
It looks like the Joy Division cover.
It does. I don't know, Mike, if you can like open a browser and look for it or something, so we can look at it a little bit and maybe comment on it, because
you want me to Google the CIA? I try not in my normal life, but CIA rebrand. Do you want an image, or what do you want from this?
Whichever you find interesting for commenting.
Hang on, let's go to Dazed.
The weird logo that they came out with. Yeah, that's it.
There you go.
Right.
No, that's real.
It is real.
It looks like a shoe brand or like a hype beast commodity.
I wonder why. But the point is, well, what I'm understanding about their rebrand is that they're trying to appeal to a younger audience. Like they're trying to recruit Zoomers into the CIA, I guess. I'm not sure what they're thinking about.
I made a video on that,
they need a TikTok if they want to do that. The CIA should get on that.
I mean, isn't the U.S. Army streaming on Twitch?
That's what Call of Duty is for.
Yeah, that's true. That's all true.
Yeah, the CIA should stream, I don't know, Metal Gear Solid or something like that. They are probably listening. Yeah. So anyway, what I was really thinking about when I was making the meme, I did find this whole CIA rebranding interesting, but I felt it was like just a small piece of a whole thing that's been going on through the whole pandemic. Because what I see a lot is that governance in general, the United States, Mexico, Europe, China, all around the world, I see a lot of decisions based on PR, really, rather than decisions based on actual science. At first, right? I think Trump was a great example of PR-based decisions. In my country, we had our share of PR-based decisions too that also shamed a lot of the governments. And what I thought was pretty interesting, right? Yes, CIA dripping. Yeah, they do have that drip now. But what I did find interesting is that we broke a little bit with that, right? This last year, we broke with this whole PR management kind of deal because people's lives are actually at risk. People can actually die if they just follow whatever the government, whatever the news tells them that they have to do. That wasn't actual fact yesterday. I mean, yesterday, right? But I mean, conceptually yesterday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, someone
That's
who's
actually my
following
favorite
that,
chapter.
I'm somehow trying to like look after the back end, so to speak. Which sounds more interesting than it is. I'm trying to look after the tech side, and I'll come in a second.
Right.
I do think this was probably my favorite chapter of them all. Like all that solid melts into PR.
Nice.
But I have actually a very big personal experience with that. But I thought we would analyze your meme first.
No, go ahead. I'd love to hear it.
Well, sure. Yeah. So I actually worked for quite a while in public service. I'm not going to say where, but in Canada. And I saw like directly inside as to how like these, like I worked in like PR.
Right.
It was essentially that. They didn't call it that. They call it something fancy and whatever. But it's really essentially just PR for the government. So part of some of like the tasks that I do is promote what the government does for indigenous people. And I can tell you from all I know, the government does jack for indigenous people. Absolutely. Yeah. Like it's so bad that essentially they have like these programs for it's like rather than actually like building giving more access to like free university and a bunch of different resources, or even it's basically like job opportunities in like oil. In the oil industry.
Right.
And basically like,
right.
the point is
did you see that news article about the oil executive that couldn't get any opportunities because of COVID?
How recent was it?
Very recent.
Ago,
it's a sad story. Sad story.
Yeah.
Okay. But so anyways, the point is like we had to promote a wide variety of government programs, and it's just what was so clear is just how much the government actually spends on making itself look good as opposed to actually doing anything. And then some of the programs were so like absurd. It was literally like paying private businesses maybe it's like not even paying them so that they have to hire people. It's like giving them grants, encouraging them to hire people. That's like the level of neoliberal policy this was. It was ridiculous. But we had to promote it. Everything that was taught to us is what we're supposed to do, is promote it on social media, promote it here to make it seem good. And it was like later on in my like towards the end working in that sector, I was actually reading Society of the Spectacle by Guy Debord. And I feel like that Guy Debord's whole book is essentially what this chapter is. All that solid melts into PR, essentially. Very good. I'd recommend it to anybody. But it is like, so like, I don't think this is particularly new, but it's just more clear with, I guess you could say, like the virtual era, is that we go from being to having to representing. So it's more just about representing. And people make decisions on that. And a lot of, you see, governments trying way more hard to appear than to actually do. But I don't think that should be a surprise. It was just, I related to this particular chapter a lot just because I saw it directly. And it was insane how a lot of people didn't even question these things. There was a sense of realism to it. People go through their everyday duties and they're just like, oh, we got to do this. And Yeah.
Because they keep the image going, and in some way they benefit from that image themselves, right? So that's why they want to keep it going. They don't want to question it deeper. It's that capitalism with a human face, and it's almost that move towards social democracy that we got into earlier. But yeah, let's keep going. We have Ernesto. You have other memes?
Let's do this.
Right.
Hang on, I have to think now what quote this is. I don't
This
know.
is I actually made a mistake.
This
it's
is
page 60, not 61.
Oh, I may have the wrong. I may have the
chapter
wrong one.
But whatever you have,
I thought it was the quote when somebody actually says Plato. He actually quotes Brown talking about. Plato.
That's a mistake I made. That's the next page. But it's on the previous page.
Talk about this meme then and why you. Maybe you can.
I can read it if you want. Yeah. So
page 60.
Page 60. So thanks, Adam. So he says, if memory disorder provides a compelling analogy for the glitches in capitalist realism, the model for its smooth functioning would be dream work. When we are dreaming, we forget, but immediately forget that we have done so. Since the gaps and lacunae in our memories are photoshopped out, they do not trouble or torment us. What dream work does is to produce a confabulated consistency which covers over anomalies and contradictions. And it is this which Wendy Brown picked up on when she argued that it was precisely dream work which provided the best model for understanding contemporary forms of power. And then Fisher cites Brown for the next page and a half. And then the second quote that he picks up, that's when he picks up Plato. So I'll read that just to finish, right? The choosing subject, as Brown claims, the choosing subject and the governed subject are far from opposites. Frankfurt School intellectuals and before them Plato theorized the open compatibility between individual choice and political domination, and depicted democratic subjects who are available to political tyranny or authoritarianism precisely because they are absorbed in a province of choice and need satisfaction that they mistake for freedom. Yeah, like Kamala Harris, man. Freedom.
Bezos' candidate.
Yeah. So yeah, of course, the quote made me think of the cave. Coincidentally, a lot of Plato cave memes coming up, so it's good for the meme economy.
Can you just reiterate the Plato's cave analogy?
Right. So he says, Brown said that Plato theorized the open compatibility between individual choice and political domination, and that is what is being played out in the allegory of the cave, right? It's political domination through individual choice of sitting down, right, and just staring at shadows all day. That's PR.
You're staring at shadows when actually the real thing's happening somewhere behind you or outside the cave, and then that's casting shadows on the wall. Just in case anyone doesn't know the Plato analogy, because we're putting
that makes sense. That does make sense.
YouTube.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. This is.
But yeah, great meme. We will post that later. Yeah, thank you. With your name on it, if you want your name on it.
Oh, yeah, please.
So yeah, I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, a lot of what it's about is the fact that we are very much controlled by the media. I mean, it's one of the most obvious things one can say, but it's passed into a new effective period where we're actually controlled by the media that we're making, which is kind of bizarre. And how do we get out of that? Which is a good way of bringing in our guests. If anyone wants to at some point come in, Ernesto can finish if he wants to say something about this meme. We might not get on to the next meme.
Go ahead.
But yeah, I mean, so we're here, we're talking as a group. This is what happens quite a lot these days on Zoom because we're in lockdown and whatnot. It gives us a capacity to organize as leftists, but we're not, invariably, we're not doing much that's actually challenging the system. What might we do? How can we challenge the notion that there is no alternative, or rather, how can we produce an alternative? Or indeed, is there just no alternative? So you came here to watch us speak. I don't think that's all you want to do, surely. If you have anything to say yourselves, you want to join in and speak, or you want to write something in the comment box which we can comment on, then be our guests. Otherwise, we'll just go on talking. It's a bit like being a teacher now.
I was wondering if anyone specifically wanted to follow up Ernesto's comments about dream work, since I know we have a couple people that are joining us that are working with psychoanalysis.
Right. Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, it takes a lot of people to chime in sometimes, but if you have any,
I believe people had questions earlier on, like throughout it.
they
like
were
in the
making
starting.
points the whole time, but whether those were questions that they wanted to speak about, or whether they were just talking between them, there were some really interesting points coming up. If anyone wants to go through those and pick out things, Kyle, do you want to speak?
Kyle, yeah. You're muted, by the way, Kyle. So maybe that's why we can't hear you.
Ask him to unmute, it says.
Yeah, I'm sure he knows he's muted. He's just, yeah, he's working on it.
Okay.
All right.
This is capitalist realism. Okay, he just needs a couple of seconds.
We can move on to the next meme. It's pretty short.
Yeah. The next one, great. So it's year 0 again. It's a line again from the last chapter? Yeah, page 78.
Do you have the eCodex, or do you want me to?
I do have it. Yeah, I think. No, that's going to be tricky. Okay, so, hang on. Yeah, I think it might be this quote.
Despite initial appearances and hopes, capitalist realism is not undermined by the credit crisis of 2008. The speculations that capitalism might be on the verge of collapsing soon proved to be unfounded. It quickly became clear that, far from constituting the end of capitalism, the bank bailouts were a massive reassertion of the capitalist realist insistence that there is no alternative.
I think we played this
The
one.
banking system to
But this is the one.
held to be
fine.
unthinkable, and what ensued was a vast hemorrhaging of public money into private hands. Nevertheless, what did happen in 2008 was the collapse of the framework which has provided ideological cover for capitalist accumulation since the 1970s. After the bank bailouts, neoliberalism has, in every sense, been discredited. That is not to say that neoliberalism has disappeared overnight. On the contrary, its assumptions continue to dominate political economy, but that they do so now as no longer part of an ideological project that has a confident forward momentum, but is inertial, undead defaults. We can now see that, while neoliberalism was necessarily capitalist realist, capitalist realism could not be neoliberal. In order to save itself, capitalism could revert to a model of social democracy or to a children of men-like authoritarianism. Without a credible and coherent alternative to capitalism, capitalist realism will continue to rule the political, economic unconscious. Even if it is now evident that the credit crisis will not lead to the end of capitalism all by itself, the crisis has led to the relaxing of a certain kind of mental paralysis. We are now in a political landscape littered with what Alex Williams called ideological rubble. It is year 0 again, and a space has been cleared for new anti-capitalism to emerge, which is not necessarily tied to the old language or traditions. One of the left's vices is its endless rehearsal of historical debates, its tendency to keep going over Kronstadt or the new economic policy, rather than planning and organizing for a future that it already believes in.
That's
the
good
failure
enough,
of
by the way.
previous forms of anti-capitalist political organization.
You got it, yeah.
The Acid Left is a project run by cultural theorist and curator
That was classy. Okay. All right.
I thought it was planned, and I was like, wow, neat.
Ernesto.
Right. So while reading this, I just felt like this felt like it was written during the pandemic. He's talking about the credit crisis of 2008, but I think that what the credit crisis didn't do was affect the entire global population, right? It affected certainly the upper class and the middle class and part of the working class, but the part of the working class, for example, that's in the global south, they didn't really see a change in their conditions. Their conditions were already pretty shitty. You know what I'm saying? And right now with COVID, that's certainly not the case. Now we're all in danger, and everybody's conditions are up in the air. So I do think that this present time is a change, especially with the fact that the Democrats are about to win the Senate. I mean, I know that's just electoralism and all that, but small wins.
Well, that is true. I mean, I take a different stance to a number of the people we're close to within the left online. I think these small gains are necessary. I mean, if it wasn't a case that Biden had won and then had won the Senate, and if instead Trump had won, where would we be now? I mean, I know these are small victories, but it's just lesser of two evils things that you really could get into big arguments about with self-described communists. But I think you can even be a socialist or communist and still see that you don't need things to get as bad as they possibly can. Just to prove that neoliberalism is already bad. You see what I mean? It's like, I don't want neoliberalism doesn't mean, oh, fuck it, let's just have Trump let's just have Trump become world king.
Some people are calling that accelerationism, and I hate when people say that.
Sorry, what's that about accelerationism?
Well, what you're describing is some people who just want to let it burn and just have Trump get elected again and make neoliberalism get work. But what I mean is some people are calling that accelerationism, and that's not what accelerationism is at all, as a theory both on the left or the right. So it's weird. I don't think many people really believe that. There's just, I think the more, I guess you could say, what we see in online left circles is there's people who just don't see a difference. But I don't think, and there is a difference, even though if it may be small, but I don't think it's so much like you have people on a serious level really wanting to just make things bad so people have a revolution, because things have been getting bad for 50 years at this point, with stagnant wages. At least in the US, it's been quite literally decreasing through buying power. So if bad conditions were to actually was really what directly led people to revolt, then that would have happened. So I don't think many people really believe that having Trump again is going to make some sort of communist revolution.
Yeah, I think there is a section that just want to demonstrate that they know that Biden is also bad. For a lot of people, this is actually a smart point to make, that they feel needs to be said. That okay, we got rid of Trump, but hold your horses, because Biden's also bad, which is very true, but it's not really, to me, a particularly smart point. It's we know that it doesn't really need restating. I think.
Well, if us leftists know that, but
no, a lot of leftists don't know. Yeah, a lot of leftists know that, but want to keep saying it. So I do wonder whether some of them are keeping saying it because really, that's about as smart as they get.
I wouldn't say that, because I think there's there is a certain, I know exactly what section of the left you're referring to, but I think that's more so a response to much of BreadTube just being really focused on what's called chud dunking, just dunking on right wingers. And they're such easy targets at this point. Everybody who's slightly to the left of center, doesn't take Ben Shapiro seriously. They don't take PragerU seriously. They're not reaching that audience. So it's just a waste of time, in my view, just to make so much Trump content, so much content about all these easy target right wingers. Whereas the people, I think, who more so, I guess, really dupe regular people are the Democrats, because I know like really earnest people who in real life who describe themselves as left wing, who voted for the centrist liberal government in Canada and are very ecstatic about Kamala Harris and Biden because they think they'll bring a Green New Deal and stuff. And they're not even going to ban fracking. Like, people need to know these things, that like the Democrats were not just not a left party, they were never a left party. And they only became slightly social democratic in response to mass international socialist movements and labor movements domestically.
Yeah,
So
I suppose what I'm seeing most of the time when somebody is saying, look, you know, that Biden's also bad, is its arguments literally between communists. Or between communists and socialists. So I mean, it's a point that's, it's like, it doesn't even really need to be said. It's one that we can move on from, is what I mean. I know that you're not stating that, but it's just surprising that we're still there, because it's like, that's the baseline. We know that Biden's bad, but that doesn't mean we want much worse. There is such thing as worse, I guess.
Well, we got
Yeah.
the worst of the Democrats. That's the thing. Is like people like
Yeah, but that's
Biden
not
is
the point was
objectively the worst.
There is
Democrat
worse than the
there
Biden.
was.
Yeah, but my statement wasn't that. Is that there is worse than Biden, which is Trump, and there's worse than Trump as well. So I mean, we can breathe for a second. At least it's not Trump, but it doesn't mean we're happy it's Biden. We know that we need to do more work, but that's where we need to organise between us. So like the arguments ongoing between people who know, you know, we know who just didn't vote because they couldn't bear to vote for Biden. We know who voted for Biden, and those arguments can still be ongoing as like, I'm more left than you are, which I think, you know, we need to get beyond, because we are fighting a heinous form of capitalism anyway. And we're not really fighting it very effectively because we're mostly squabbling online about these details.
The people you're describing, like some of the, I know like the faction of the left you're describing, and like the main so-called like thought leaders or YouTubers or whatever, who are in that faction, the anti-Biden faction, actually did vote for him. Like, for example, like
there was
Peter Coffin is very critical.
Yeah,
of, like,
but I think it's quite clear.
But he actually voted for Biden.
But most people,
so.
Sure. Yeah, but this is. I mean, we know Adam doesn't like Biden, but you know, we know lots of people who don't like Biden but voting for him. This is very clear. But there's still this portion. I think we're giving too much time to this because it's not that relevant. But there's a portion who just didn't vote. There's also actually a number of Canadians and just generally non-Americans who couldn't vote in the US elections, who are saying like, how dare you vote Biden? So a lot of this is kind of irrelevant. But you know, there's these hypothetical, you know, all these hypotheticals around, you know, how one shouldn't vote for Biden, but he's won anyway, and there wasn't really much choice. And I think some of these people in America who didn't vote for him were in strong democratic states as well, and they really like to parade their having not voted for Biden, and you know, this is kind of lame. But again, I think we're going to lose too much time on that. I suppose what we're both trying to say one time is that we know that the capitalism still needs to be taken on. It's like, it's not like anything we can take our foot off the pedal to any degree now that Biden's getting in. We still need everything to be done, and we're not anywhere near moving things towards socialism, I guess.
Yeah, because now that you let's not turn this into a U.S. politics thing strictly, even though there's crazy stuff going on as we speak. But yeah, we're gonna be entering the Biden administration with the slimmest of margins with the Democratic control, and we have to hold them accountable for the stuff that they don't do while during these first 2 years, especially, because then it'll be time for another movement. But yeah, I mean, I agree with both sides. I don't know. I had to go to the bathroom and I came back and we were talking about Biden. So what's going on now?
Okay, well, let's move on. Let's see. Is Kyle any closer to sorting out his audio?
I think I am. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, I can hear.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I noticed in the comments when everyone was introducing themselves that a lot of people work or study in university or college or something like that. And I think it's towards the end of capitalist realism. And I've thought about this point quite a lot since first reading it, which was granted only about 4 months ago. Fisher basically cautions people working in the education sector against taking industrial and strike action, because I think his basic argument is something like, and it's completely fair, when we go on strike in academia or in research or in college, we're kind of reinforcing the notion that the students are products, and that education is a market commodity, very similar to other aspects. And I'm someone that's in the UK, I've been on strike with the UCU union about 3 times within the past 2 or 3 years. And I, as a union member, if the union strikes, I will go on strike. But I can't help but feel that some of Fisher's points are completely fair. I'm not a lecturer, I'm a researcher, so my deadlines don't get pushed back. And I'm thinking, well, what is this effective? We might make some PR, but what about the lecturers? Are they just hurting the students? And this is I don't know, I've been thinking about this a lot. I think his ultimate suggestion is that we should just reject the bureaucratic tasks of our job, but I don't know how realistic that is. So I was wondering if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
We have a similar situation here in Mexico. We have a massive teachers union, and they keep doing the same thing. They think that working for good PR and for good presence, you know, in the news, that's what matters, and not actually doing something for the students. And really, when it comes down to it, when you ask people in the streets what they think about the teachers union, they think that they're terrible for education.
Yeah, it's strange in the US because the teachers unions, along with the nurses unions, are really much the only like even somewhat strong unions we have. But they're also, you know, kind of protected because they're a licensed degree. So they have this element of protection built in that the rest of people don't have. And you have a lot of working class resentment against teachers for asking for fair wages and stuff like that. But they're treated terribly. I'm not sure how teachers are treated in the UK. I'm sure it's not wonderful, but I don't know how it compares to the US. I remember on our last conversation, Ernesto, you mentioned something about maybe the idea of being like to actually still try to engage the students, of course, but to skip the process that like furthers you know, the university itself, but like not turning in the grades and stuff, but still holding lectures and things like that. But then Mike also brought up the fact that really, that's good, but it only helps insofar as the students really care about learning and don't just see their educations as a means to get a job to, you know, further there. So
yeah, I mean,
that's my input there. I have no answer.
You know, more it's a systemic issue that, I mean, I suppose many students care about learning, but they need that certificate. You know, they need that degree or whatever. So,
Jenny, did you want to say something?
Yeah, is that okay? Sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand on Zoom.
That's perfect.
I'm coming from a kind of position of teaching in a FE college in Scotland, which is a kind of, I think this is what you were talking about at the beginning, Mike, about this kind of place in education that isn't school and it isn't university, but it's not compulsory education. And I'm just thinking about the kind of maybe oversimplification of striking in relation to teaching and the impact on the student. I know certainly in universities, I should say actually, as a college, we've been on strike nationally and locally every year for like the last 10 years or something. And it's the only way for us I feel like it's the only way for us to get a result. And yes, there is an impact on the students' learning, but I think there's also very creative ways to avoid that. And I think that politically, I suppose, I feel like I'm in a really good position being an FE because we're not really cared about in the same way that universities are or schools. So there's a space there where we can actually do something that I feel is important, but also really still values the union and sees the importance of the union in a very basic way of looking after its workers. And of course, there's an impact on the student, and that's the intention, because then, of course, then the impact then is on the economy of the institution itself, which is the aim. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would just say, like, so I completely get that. I just think that there's a bit of an issue that it's hard to show what our impact is, and it might be the same. I assume that you're also in the UCU if you're in the Scottish. No, any U, is it?
Yes, I'm a different union, and actually I can see I've been very involved in the union for years, and I can see an absolute difference between what happens at the college and what happens at the university, and my colleagues at the university. It's a completely different culture. So it's something that is, because of history, because of the beast that Edinburgh University is in relation to kind of the sort of Cinderella status of FE education. So yeah, sorry, I interrupted you there.
No, that's all right. So I was just saying that kind of when you do industrial action in a typical Fordist production line, you take the time off, there is a definite lack of profit, and that hits them in their pockets very directly. When we take strike action in the education sector, the university, so the university strikes that have been going on the past few years, there's a massive debate about whether the students should get some of their tuition fees back, because it seems to me that if the students don't get their tuition fees back, there is zero financial impact for the university. They have just saved the wages of the striking staff, which then has to come out of our union funds. Yeah. But if the students, if we say, if like the striking staff say, okay, well, the students' education's been impacted, we'll support them to get some of their tuition fees back, because most people in the union obviously don't support tuition fees for students. But it seems if we say, okay, well, we'll support you to get your tuition fees back, then we're reinforcing this idea that education is itself a commodity. So I feel like it's a really awkward position to be in, striking in education. And it wasn't really until Fisher pointed that out that something clicked, and I was like, what? There is something a bit different there.
Do you think that's another sort of idiosyncrasy and a difference between Scotland and England? Because of course in Scotland we don't have tuition fees, and a lot of the FE teaching that I'm doing is actually state funded. So there's a difference in commodity, if you like, there. But absolutely, I think if education became a business many years ago, so if you follow a business model, then yeah.
You know, I did teach as an adjunct in 2 American universities in Italy, which was a very specific situation. But I will say that we were contracted semester to semester, and we could have been got rid of immediately if we did something which upset the dean or the establishment there, and that made it virtually impossible to strike or to have any kind of action against the system. And there are a lot of 0 hours contracts in the UK, which are much worse than even my contract at the time. So I think this virtually prevents people from mounting any kind of sustained action. And I think that any kind of sustained action just isn't going to happen without a lot of disruption to the tutors and to the students. You would have to just accept that there was going to be like really a lot of disruption that was going to be probably quite upsetting. And I mean, even more than already things are upsetting with COVID and the disruption that's causing. And I just don't think anyone's really up for that level of disruption because we are quite comfortable compared to, decades past, we can imagine much more uncomfortable situations, people who go on sustained strikes and protests, they tend to be literally hungry or something. This is one problem with capitalist realism, is that it does provide for people. So the choice is, well, you just carry on and you carry on grumbling and dealing with this, or you basically end up jobless and in a much worse situation. You basically either carry on with this situation. Imagining one has a job, you're teaching and the conditions aren't good, then you either carry on with that situation, the conditions are rubbish, you're only really getting enough to feed yourself to go back to teach again it daily, and house yourself. But the option is that, or a situation in which you just can't house yourself. You see what I mean? You lose your job, you lose your reputation, you can't easily get work in universities again, etc. So as long as we're being sustained so we can get by, it's difficult to raise a movement that has any passion to challenge capitalism. You see what I mean? Does that make sense?
I think my concern is the opposite. Not that these strikes are too disruptive to the students, but kind of that they're not disruptive enough, because like not all of the staff are in the union. Not all of the staff will go on strike. If we take a couple of weeks off, again, so if the students don't get their tuition fees back, there's no financial impact to the university. They might get a few angry newspaper articles about how the university is ripping students off, but they'll still continue to do so. So my concern is that the strike action, not that it's too disruptive, but that it's not disruptive enough.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I meant. Maybe it wasn't very clear, but I just mean that that people kind of get prevented. People stop themselves from protesting beyond a certain point because they're scared of losing their accreditation, their degree, or if their teachers are losing their job. But any sustained protest which is going to really challenge capitalism would have to involve all of those things. That's kind of what I meant. But we don't want to do those things because the stakes are not such that it's worth doing those things, because we're not starving. That's kind of what I mean. That's the real challenge. How do you develop a kind of strong incendiary class consciousness when people are kind of okay? Even if, things are really shit.
Really?
Well, I think people are
One
kind
of
of
the,
okay compared to places where you've seen like massive uprisings leading to civil wars and stuff, French Revolution type stuff. That people were really not okay, in the sense that we are the capitalist system has kind of taken care of its working class to the extent that they can eat, they can get by. They're eating crap that's making them useless for anything other than doing their crappy jobs. But that's kind of like the bind that capitalism has created, this kind of space of bullshit living, but where you just kind of keep ticking over. And it's that they can keep people ticking over so they can keep going day by day, which is kind of keeping people in that grey area where they kind of think something should be done, but they don't want to do it because that means giving up the minimum comfort they have, maybe. And then, you've got policemen everywhere. The picture we see now, you've got policemen looking like soldiers everywhere. That kind of psychology plays against people protesting. You don't want that. There's summary imprisonments of people to make examples. Who was that son of a Pink Floyd musician? There was that guy, he swung off a flag on the Cenotaph, this monument in the UK during a protest. He was a son of, was it Dave Gilmour or a different member of Pink Floyd? And they locked him up. And you get this quite a lot when you get major protests in the UK. They'll like pick out one person. There's a kid threw a fire hydrant around 2001 off the top of a roof in, I think it was some anti-capitalist protest. Didn't hit anyone, but he put them away for 7 years or so, 7 or 8 years. You do this to one person and that puts other people off protesting. So I think things are kind of stitched up so that you don't get ongoing struggles even within industries or fields like education. So I don't know if that's kind of like a little bit veering away from what Carl was saying, but I just wanted to kind of.
I think more so than the authoritarian apparatus, it's more so the biggest thing that really makes it hard to organize is the gig economy, because like by design, like if you're so easily able to be laid off, and a lot of people, and I think this is partially due to the individualistic new age self-help neoliberal ideology that sort of supplements the gig economy. A lot of people are less likely to really have the empathy for the people in the same working position and more likely to just want to replace them when they get laid off. And I think that the ideology has a big role to play in that. I really can't stress how important I think ideology is. And especially, like, I don't think it's a coincidence that we see in the age of the gig economy, which is, I think, one of the biggest obstacles to organizing, is this sort of, you see it proliferate on YouTube as well as a lot of popular books. You can see Jordan Peterson's part of that, but this general like hustle culture, this how to make passive income hustle, how to, a lot of PR in this too, a lot of individualizing how to get up the ladder type mindset. This kind of makes it hard to organize because it prevents people from even thinking from it. It's like a Ayn Rand type egoism.
Yeah, so Kale commented there, competitors, not comrades, and that's exactly it. You are apt to think of yourself as in competition with people that you really should have a solidarity with. So I have two directions I think we could go from here, and I'll lay them out, see if anyone wants to respond to either of them. The first is, one of the ways that Fisher talks about this is maybe if we reimagine what a union even could be, and moving from traditional forms of union work that happened in industrial and Fordist capitalism of focusing on pay and hours, to the specific discontent that we find within post-Fordism. So obviously this doesn't work for everyone. This is more of like the first world Western societies that we are talking about there. So I'm curious if anyone has ideas on what that might even look like, to really address like what a union to address the depression felt under post-Fordism or the precarity of the gig economy would look like. And then also, we could also take it in a way, because you mentioned it, of that individualistic aspect. We had a lot of pushback when Mike put out a meme highlighting one of Fisher's like offhand critiques of Max Stirner, and a bunch of people were very upset about that. And then a bunch of people understood it. So if anyone wants to comment on either of those, defending Stirner or reimagining a union in a post-Fordist world.
Yeah, if I could just, on the first point, this reimagining the union, I don't really get that point fully. I mean, a lot of the working class aren't in the West, and maybe for a revolution to happen, it would have to come from the global South. For a truly global revolution, which is what revolution ought to end up being, you would need the global South on board, and it'd probably have more of a hand in it finally than we would in the West. So, I mean, their considerations are still kind of Fordist, or certainly not post-Fordist in the way that Fisher suggests. Then I just think that, do we really have these concerns that are post-Fordist that are very different structurally, than the concerns of Fordist or pre-Fordist capitalist workers, or workers under capitalism? I don't know really. I don't know that Fisher should be just suggesting that fundamentally the structure has changed such that we should be addressing people getting upset because their broadband's not working, rather than getting upset because they're being subjugated daily by the capitalist boss. I think fundamentally the conditions of work are very similar, and part of the problem is not really that we have post-Fordist conditions, it's just that people think we have post-Fordist conditions. It's more an issue that people don't really realize the extent to which we exist in a capitalist society, specifically where we're subjugated for our labor value, and it's labor value that is really keeping the capitalist machine running. Therefore, if we retract that labor value and strike, we can maybe change things, and that's what one would do for a union. I mean, so I just think that what we need to do is educate the people as to what the conditions of capitalism are, and that we haven't made these huge leaps so that now we're not in capitalism, the brutal kind we used to be in, because we have broadband and smartphones and this and that, which is not, I guess, what Fisher is saying. But I mean, I think the problem is not that we live in a post-Fordist situation that is radically different. So we need a new union that can respond to post-Fordist problems. I think it's just that the public think that we have new post-Fordist problems rather than the old problems, and that we need to educate them into socialist politics. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think it makes sense. I don't know if I agree with you, but I think it makes sense.
Okay. If you want to disagree, or Ernesto, do you agree broadly or not?
Well, in my regard, I guess I represent the dimension of the Fordist economies in this sense, and I certainly do think that we still have a lot of an uphill battle in things that you guys already won ages ago, right? One of the main points that I hear every day, and honestly, it even gives me a headache, it's that when I'm talking with also other people in management positions in other companies, our clients is what I'm talking about here. They usually are they're transnationals, right? So they have experience working in the United States, they have experience working in Brazil, in India, and in Europe, and they will talk about these experiences with you. And one of the things that they always tell me is that employees in the United States are so petty, and they're so delicate. That's what they say. Because, of course, here in Mexico, if you ask us to throw out our bags to lift, tons, we will do it because we have no other choice. We can't emigrate to another first world country to find, right? We can't do that. But in the United States, well, of course, there is this whole healthcare system, right? But what I tell my colleagues is that here in Mexico, at least, if you throw out your back, the company sends you to the to public insurance, and they'll patch you up terribly, but it won't cost you a dime, right? It will, it will have costs, right? We're talking about accidents and so on. But in the United States, you have an accident, you throw out your back, and you're on your own, right? Like there's no actual state that looks out for you. So of course people are picky about what kind of job you're asking them to do. Of course people will think twice before lifting X amount of weight, right? Because their health isn't guaranteed by a nanny state, right? And again, It's not like we have a solution or anything here, but I can see the difference in how it plays out. And sometimes when you don't want to bring differences together, you can't really make a sense of why you might think that one is better than the other when they're really not, right? It's a systemic thing.
Yeah, Prof. Richard Wolff actually has like a good point about why a lot of people don't strike in America, having to do with the fact that a lot of Americans anyway, depend on their employees to receive healthcare because it's tied directly to their job. And
Right.
That's also why the unemployment rate isn't as high as it really should be in America. Like America likes to brag about, for a while, it's obviously terrible now, but for a while they always say, oh, we have low unemployment. Look at France, they have 30%. Whereas like you could say in France, you have a lot more access to public services. You don't have to pay for healthcare. You don't have to pay for education, and you have a lot more freedom in your work when it comes to sick leave and stuff like that. But right. That's a big part in America is like people don't want to leave their jobs, even though if they might be miserable, awful, because they risk having to pay a lot more in health insurance individually. So it is like there's that. Also, I think there's the what one might say class consciousness. I just like to use the word ideology, but that is obviously like in America, it's no surprise, it's a lot more brainwashed. And it's because the ideology is a lot more propaganda exists everywhere, but I would say like almost every aspect of American mainstream cultural media, not just mainstream media, but cultural media has a degree of like an ideology in it. So it's not so much only that we can just point out to people these things are happening, we should care or raise awareness. It's more like unlearning. There's a lot for Americans, and I would say the UK is probably the worst in Europe when it comes to this, is having like heavy ideology. There's a lot of unlearning to do, because it's not like in England, the working class conditions are particularly much better than other countries in Europe. Maybe you could say Eastern Europe. Some countries in Eastern Europe are slightly worse, but in England was hit arguably the hardest by the '08 recession and has recovered the slowest in Europe, that is. So, I mean, I don't think it's only just that people are comfy that they're not revolting. A lot of it has to do with ideology, quite simply.
Right. Realism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose what I was saying was, yeah, it is ideology. That's exactly it. We need to teach them that they're not comfortable. But that kind of links back to my point of them thinking they're comfortable. That they kind of, they feel they're okay. But I'm not saying they're okay. I think that Fisher's right that the capitalist system is causing them depression, but they're not thinking that they need to be writing because they're starving. And of course, one issue is they're not really starving, but they are eating crappy food. I'd say that's definitely the case. That's probably making them depressed as well. But yeah, there was a comment from Kale earlier. He's got Jung's big red book, and is it worth bothering with? I mean, Jung we've talked about on our Twitch channel recently, twitch.tv/the acid left. If you want to look, there's a lengthy conversation on Jung in relation to an app which kind of gives you random coordinates, which then you follow, and then maybe you will chance upon kind of random things which can fit into a Jungian framework of symbols, etc. It's kind of a weird topic, but we talk about Jung there. But I mean, yeah, Jung could come into this, but I'm not sure we can go into it really now. But mental health is certainly an issue, and I'd say that's also a reason why people may be suffering but not realizing they're suffering. And the great thing about capitalist realism is it points out that you're suffering because of capitalism. You're not depressed because you're ineffective. You're depressed because you're being subjugated, and this has eventually takes its toll on your body. And you can seek out help for that. And I think Jung's got a good angle, but I know Jung's kind of quite unpopular with analysts that I know. But maybe this would be like a complete sidetrack. So, but I think the mental health issue is a good one, which I really think that's what the book is driving at. And then, of course, with Fisher's sad departure as a result of suicide and following very poor mental health, well, obviously, then this takes on a new poignancy. That he wasn't messing around when he's saying capitalism causes you depression. Of course, I think there can be other kind of causes, biological, etc. We shouldn't overlook. But yeah, I mean, obviously the excessive workload and the being made to feel worthless if you don't obtain certain financial and status goals. These obviously are not good for one's health. I didn't know if anyone wanted to kind of come in on that and how that fits into everything.
Can I just come in quickly?
Yeah.
I was just going to. I've not formed a cohesive thought about this because I'm still really thinking about it. But when we're talking about being comfortable, I've thought about this a lot, and the need to be in a place of complete discomfort to be able to sort of act. But in the same breath, I'm aware that from where I'm sitting in complete comfort, less than a mile away, we've got abject poverty and deep poverty, and we've got 3 generations of unemployed families. And I'm thinking that I don't want to patronize and I don't want to oversimplify, but there's something within that level of social class where there's not even a realization that there is an alternative to this way of living, which actually is getting by day. And for me, I think the problem is the real lack of representation from people who are able to and are active for people who are in a position of not being able to. Does that make sense? So as being voices for people who can. And
it makes sense.
Also, those of us who are in close to the middle class, at least, have the luxury, right, of reading about these things and learning about these things. Whereas a lot of most working class people just simply don't. I mean, we do have things like YouTube and more access to things, but just people just don't have the time. And so there is, of course, that. So I think there is no coincidence that a lot of the Frankfurt School thinkers were not just middle class, I think fairly wealthy. And a lot of, you see a lot of even revolutionaries actually come from fairly wealthy backgrounds, like Fidel Castro. I think his dad was a landlord, Mao's as well, Lenin, middle class. It's, or Engels, Marx, right? So, I mean, there is that problem, right? That just some people just not having the time energy to engage in that. But I don't think it's so much the material conditions themselves being comfy that discourage people, because we did see like a lot of Corbyn's base was students, and it's not really fair to say all students are bourgeois, because a lot of people have like debt, especially in the case of America. But you could say it is like something to consider, right? That it's the sort of left surge isn't exactly coming from where it did in the 1920s proletarian movements.
Yeah, but I think you've got to consider the level of hunger amongst people in the 1920s that were really suffering for the depression at the end of the 20s. I mean, I'm not saying people.
World War I.
I really don't want to like sound like I've been saying that people are comfortable, but I mean, you know, it's a level of subsistence which, you know, you then have to go, am I going to deal with this level of crappy subsistence, or am I going to go and take on those policemen carrying guns, you know? So I think, you know, this is the thing, that eventually your level of subsistence could fall so low that suddenly that becomes appealing to go and attack the servants of the state. But, you know, I don't think people are there. So then how else do you convince them? But I think you're quite right, Jenny, that there's people who don't really know just how bad their situation is, or that something else is possible. It is a shame that or it's unfortunate that the discourse is dominated by middle class people. That's kind of how academia works. And I think there's lots to be said for empowering working class people by taking the discourse to them, and then they may have whole ways of talking about all of this that are very different to, you know, to the way we talk when we discuss Marx. And I think that's a big key, is like, how do we reach out to people, get discourses going? Because I think, you know, people know that there's something not quite right, for sure.
And allow people to feel agency. I think that's what I mean, when I encounter, I mean, I work in what was a community college in the area that I'm talking about, which now has a slightly different function, but I still have students who are from this local community who don't know that they have agency. They don't, of course, they don't understand that. It's not a thought that enters their head. I mean, I think there was a bit of galvanization around our young round about the referendum for independence. There was something that happened there, which was kind of maybe a signifier of power or potential power. But I don't know, I feel like, and I feel really grateful for this evening. It's really been great for me to come along. So thank you. I feel like I do go to quite a lot of reading groups, and the question in the back of my head is always, when does this become activism? You know, I'm not suggesting that in this forum just now, because I think we're in a very global perspective, and that's exciting for me. More often than not, I'm in a very local situation where we discuss things endlessly, and I always feel a bit like, right, I need to go and do something now. What is it I'm going to do? I'll tell you what I am going to do, actually. I'm going to go and feed my kids because they're whining. I can hear them. So,
thank you for coming. And feel welcome to come back. And your last point is a very good one. Yeah,
I'd love to come back. Can I also ask if the images that you showed earlier, because obviously I'm from a visual background, teaching theory and context, but I'd love to use some of the memes if there's any possibility for that, for me to.
They're free.
Yeah, I can email them. I mean,
amazing.
I can email them to you later. Yeah.
Thank you so much. But I've really appreciated that, everyone. So, bye.
Yeah.
Bye, Jenny.
Bye-bye.
Bye. I don't know how to go now. This is awkward.
So I think touching on those last couple talks, really, it is about communication between people. Because at the same time, we don't want to fetishize poverty. And, you know, because there comes a point where, yeah, you might get to that level where you think, okay, it's really, I need to act now, but it also sucks being at that level. You know, a lot of us have all, I'm sure, lived in poverty or known people who lived in poverty. And I've seen extreme poverty in the States, and we know it exists all over. And even if at some point, like if you are at that level and, you know, you're desperate and you say, oh, well, you know what? Insurrection or rioting is open to me. It is this possibility. It might be blind rage. You know, it might lack the focus to lead to something that could actually be constructive. And that's where you need that contact between people, you know, these so-called experts or academics, you know, that would go and talk to factory workers and stuff like that. People that are, you know, mixing between there, so it's not so stratified.
I don't know that you really at all need academics to speak to workers. I mean, you need people to gather people together. I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying completely, or at least what you said before you said that part. Like people who get very hungry, they're in real poverty. They may feel the need to act, but it manifests in rage. And the problem is often one is acting alone. So what you need is to act as a community. And I think we do need community building, but I don't know that we necessarily need academics to build those communities, because I think academics spend a lot of their time hiding from those communities. That's why they go into academia. So you know, I don't think you can build an academic to go and speak to a worker. I think they really don't want to go near them. That's partly why they kind of read, you know, they spout off so much Marx, because it's a very good way of excusing their position. Like, you know, I'm not going to do anything, but I'm reading Marx. So, you know, that kind of covers all my bases. You know, I don't want to get my hands dirty, but I am kind of involved, but I'm not really getting, you know, I'm not going to like go and like pelt a policeman around the head with a brick or anything.
Well, so what I mean is somewhat
getting too graphic there, but no, just I wanted to
in Minecraft.
Right.
But the thing is like gathering. I mean, I had a point not that long ago, about 2014, where I couldn't go to exhibitions people were inviting me to when I was an art critic for a number of international magazines. I couldn't go to any exhibitions for a few days, but that's like one of the things I couldn't do. I couldn't actually go to the shops, and it's because my last pair of shoes got a hole in the sole, got a hole in the bottom, and I had no money to buy new shoes. Now that has to be because there's a high degree of poverty in a Western country. So I have known poverty, and I can certainly say at that point I was in no position to revolt. I couldn't even leave the house. You see what I mean? So I think that one in that position also, when you feel really, you know, you haven't got much money, you're not really eating properly. Maybe if you're inclined, you're like drinking when you do get some money to get through it, or whatever, or taking drugs. You're not probably going to be very together to be organising a revolution, and you're not probably feeling very confident to go and meet people and say, hey, let's make a community. So what you're saying really is like there's a level of alienation and we need people to bring them together. I totally agree. I only took exception that you saying academics should do it.
Right. So maybe academics is the wrong word there, because I have no actual love for academics as such. What I mean is like just being poor, even as a community, and being mad and acting on it might not lead you to actually engage in something that would cause real structural change, and that there's a value to people who have had time in some capacity to study history, to study political theory, and at least bring that to the present.
I agree with that. I mean, community organisers, union people, maybe people at the grassroots of even social democratic parties, you know, like Labour, the Democrats. I mean, I'm saying the parties themselves are hugely flawed, but there are sometimes people at the grassroots who actually want to make a difference.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, you need people to reach out and build communities for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's one obstacle that you're kind of hinting at, is that some people who, like a lot of people who are poor, might not necessarily want to, not just not have the time, but might not even want to, because you might add some people who might have the material interests to want a kind of socialism. You'll tell them and they'll say, well, look at what happened in the Soviet Union. You always have these type of responses. So the thing is there is like a lot of like there is a lot to do on the ground when it comes to disseminating ideas, or just making ideas like simple for people. Like, how is this actually going to benefit me? Is this not going to amount to a kind of bureaucratic authoritarianism? These are presuppositions that many people have, and that's why the communicative angle, or what people used to call with less baggage, propaganda. Simply, propaganda didn't always have a negative term. It was just a way to, spread messages, and I feel like that is something the left lacks, especially the academic left, because working people aren't going to be reading Jacobin. They might not even be watching BreadTube. There needs to be just ways to actually just spread ideas that communicate to people in simple forms. Like, why is it in my interest to actually join and organize with my fellow workers? Or am I just going to get fired for a cause that is futile? That's probably something a lot of people think.
Yeah, well, I think that there's maybe a feeling that you can lose your job, lose your friendship circle by getting too into this stuff. It is kind of heavily discouraged in the media. I think people are kind of a bit frightened. I think there's still like a kind of memory of McCarthyism in America. Is that what you call it, or McCarthyism?
Yeah,
McCarthyism. Yeah.
Red
Scare.
McCarthy. Yeah. There's still this kind of feeling. I think that, generally that one can lose their job in a uni or wherever if you get too left. So that does present a problem. But I think we're going to have to wrap up fairly soon. So it's been a great chat. I'd love to speak a lot longer, but we need to keep this in a kind of reasonable time frame. So this is going to be on YouTube. We're going to do a lot more on Twitch soon. This will probably be on YouTube in a couple of days. We're doing a lot on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/the acid left. Again, maybe we'll do this on Twitch next time we do a group chat. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/acid left. Just that helps us pay various subscriptions and stuff to keep ourselves going, so we don't end up with no shoes again. Please stay with us. Follow what we're doing. We're on Instagram. That's @theacidleft. And please join us for our next talk. And I'd like to give anyone the closing comment who wants to have it. Anyone want to kind of just round up? Adam? The
Kale?
guy, who's this guy here? Kale.
Kale,
Yeah, Kale. Give us a comment.
I had a few that I just threw in the text, but didn't feel needed to be on mic. But specifically, just talking about kind of like, it's interesting that we kind of, the people that we have that have time to sit around and read about this stuff don't have the direct experience of being crushed by it, and the people being crushed by it don't have the time. And I think that kind of came out during this COVID stuff with all the anti-mask stuff, in the sense that like the time that they felt they were being oppressed was the one time the government was like pretending to give a shit about them, kind of thing. And that was really interesting to me. So I did like, it's just after the passage that Ernesto, you based that one meme on 61 here, but he specifically talks about the open compatibility between individual choice and political domination, and depicted democratic subjects who are available to political tyranny or authoritarianism precisely because they are absorbed in a province of choice and need satisfaction that they mistake for freedom. And I don't know if that's kind of the key ingredient. I mean, just trying to convince people that, I don't know, just that hamster wheel, they almost self-identify with the hamster wheel as their freedom kind of thing, like being able to make choices within that hamster cage. And I don't know if that's the illusion that needs to be focused on more so than the idea that change is possible. I think we need to convince people that they want a change to begin with.
Well, there's clearly this certain yearning, because you'll see all this content that's directed to people on how to be your own boss, how to be independent. Buy my course and I'll tell you how to get rich off this or whatever. Like, there's a yearning on this independence type wave. Like, people just simply, I think, don't like working under employers. And there's an even though people might not know at a conscious level, there is an intuitive feeling that you're doing more work than what you're actually paid for. I think, and on an intuitive level, most people kind of know that. So it's like what these sort of, I think it's just a matter of how to tap into that. There is. So like Richard Wolff, the reason why he likes to promote the idea of worker cooperatives so much, even though that's not by conventional definition what socialism is, he calls that socialism clearly as a way to just make it popular. And I think it's actually an interesting tactic, because if he was saying how he did multiple studies on his students, and the number one desire among students who work part-time was that they just wanted to not have a boss. And an easier way to actually, like, realistically, most people aren't going to become employers or bosses, but what is a much better society is, frankly, if you have control over your own labor. And that is an appealing idea if you pitch that to people. Like, if ideology aside, that is, I think most people who actually work and been under bosses will know just how much, especially restaurants too. If you had democratic elections of your managers, could drastically improve things. Or even just like a food chain. If the employer had to actually earn the respect of the workers to be in that position, it would dramatically improve life. Or if you had a stake in the company you work for. These ideas, I think, are appealing to people. And I think more so these ideas are what need to be spread than just the idea of government programs. I think even if these, like, healthcare people might be in their interests, people associate government programs just with, bureaucracy, whereas the independence in the workplace and control is appealing, I think.
It is.
I think Carol's point was very good, in that we need to convince people that they don't like their hamster wheel, if I got that right. And I think one time you have a good point as well, just to finish it off, maybe like appealing to people on what could improve their lives along the lines of the kind of things that people already want, like, can I work without a boss? That might be an easier way into kind of convincing people they do want change, rather than telling them they want a revolution, which people can often resist for all the brainwashing they've had. But okay, unfortunately we have to wrap it up there, but we will have a public session again in I don't know, around 3 weeks or so, 3 or 4 weeks. And then please join us on Twitch. We're on tomorrow night at, I think, midday New York time, 5 p.m. London, twitch.tv/The Acid Left. And this talk we're having now will be on YouTube within a couple of days, I hope. Okay, so thank you everyone, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.